Hello and welcome to episode 10 of Subplot A Course, a podcast discussing a new science fiction literary work every month by casual fans just like you. I'm Stavros, and with me is someone who instructs students in mathematics only because it's the best way to intellectually crush their hopes and dreams, Charlie. Say hi, Charlie.
Yay!
All right, and also with me is Vincent, whose next medical research project compares raising children to various animal species. Say hi, Vincent.
That's actually not that inaccurate. You could do a lot of Pavlovian training on both animals and on newborn babies.
I'm glad I was on point. And finally, we're also joined by John, who will definitely be designing space troop drop pods the moment the commercial aerospace industry collapses. Say hi, John.
That is probably not going to happen. But yes, that's me, John.
Okay, great. Today we're going to be talking about Starship Troopers, written by Robert A. Heinlein and published in 1959. And you should be prepared for spoilers as usual. So talking about the plot of this book, in the fictional Earth's government, the Terran Federation, only a portion of the civilian population are actually citizens. I'm making the air quotes with my hands, but you can't see that. But they're citizens. Civilians that possess the right to vote. Juan Johnny Rico, the main character, son of civilian parents, decides on a whim that he wants to enlist for federal service. He gets assigned to the mobile infantry, basically the space army in space. Just before an all-out war with space bugs breaks out. The book spends a lot of time detailing his experience at boot camp and officer training school, after he decides to go career, of course, and culminates with the assault to capture one of the bug brains to turn the tide of the war. So let's jump right into some topic discussion. So my main thing that came out of this book is the amount of time the author spends on different things. So he spends a lot of time on Rico's experience in boot camp and officer training school, and then slightly less time on the kind of philosophical stuff, which we're going to talk about later, like how the military is portrayed and stuff like that. And then lastly, the bug war itself.
And either less time on the actual sci-fi stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's these crazy cool spacesuits, and he kind of just says like, "Oh, I could go into this, but whatevs, it's cool." So how'd you guys feel about this?
Yeah, he spends a remarkable amount of time waxing on about military training, officer training, and the role of society. I think that's probably the focus of the book. It's sort of a veneer of a science fiction. He's trying to write a book and get people interested about society, questions about society and the role of government. And I think he's like, oh, well, let's just write this in the context of a sci-fi book. I feel like that's how it's packaged.
Yeah, I think reading it, the first half I was like, okay, this is really cool with all this development and everything like that, but around 2/3 through, I was like, this reminds me a lot of when I read Atlas Shrugged in high school, and it has a plot, but it's mostly just a thinly veiled philosophy political essay. Not as many pages as Atlas Shrugged, but kind of I got that same feeling where it's the sci-fi is not the point.
But I will say that the action scenes that he does write were actually quite high quality. I really enjoyed them. So the initial drop, where he's describing the psychology of the guys before they drop, all the shrapnel obstructing any radar, the level of detail he goes into some of the stuff is it felt like every sentence was very meaty. There's a lot of stuff to kind of think about, and I really enjoyed that kind of intro coming in. I think he does wax a little bit heavy on the philosophy and behind training, behind society, behind the military later on, but that's because he wants to. But whenever you get right back into a battle scene, it's written with a very kind of a really good flair and really good pacing that makes you kind of really think about, oh wow, that's a really nice kind of, maybe not sci-fi kind of thing, maybe it's a normal military kind of thing, but it's thought of in a sci-fi environment. So there's some nice sci-fi flares in there, I think.
Oh yeah, I think this is easily one of the best written books we've read in this show. Where it's especially coming off of last time with Logan's run, where we're just yeah, it's really the quality of the writing's not good, regardless of the quality of the story. This is clearly on the opposite end, where it's every action scene, every description of the military, it's nice and to the point and gets things across in great detail, so has an impact on you, the reader, that also feeds into the big ideas of the book.
That is true, and John, let me ask you, because as our kind of our engineer on staff here, what do you have any comments at all on any of the tech in this novel? I think we've got the suits and maybe spaceships a little bit, tiny bit.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit. I mean, there's more talk about how the structure of the crew is on the ships than about the ships themselves. There's not a lot really. There's not a lot of meat to talk about in terms of the tech. He goes into some detail about the suits, only because he's sort of the focus of the book is on the mobile infantry, and that's the basic kit. A uniform or boots basically would be the suit of the book. But even then, he spends very little time on it, and it's kind of as you put it, he kind of glosses over it. So I kind of think, to some extent, on the continuum of sci-fi books, this is really light sci-fi. Not a lot of detail.
I mean, it's really light in terms of the details, like versus, I guess, in terms of being like really real or almost fantasy or that type of stuff. But
I would say it's very heavy in the thought process behind it.
Yeah.
So you've got he mentions the suits. Maybe he doesn't describe it too much, but he is describing from the point of view of Johnny Rico, who doesn't really know that much about like the tech. He's not an engineer. He didn't graduate with a bunch of math skills and stuff. But you'll be like, oh yeah, there are like 600 checks I need to run to get it from cold to hot. It's going to take me 3 weeks. It's not like your typical mecha book where you're like, oh, I summon him from the sky and I jump in and I blow everything up. It's more like, oh no, I got to run like 50 diagnostics on just the arm and then like 60 diagnostics on the codpiece. It reads kind of like a military book. But it's a very well thought out kind of sci-fi thing where he's like, well, let me see how I'd warm up a tank. Let's multiply that by 50 for some super-powered futuristic mech suit that lets me jump over buildings with jump jets and flamers and miniature atom bombs and stuff like that. There's definitely some sci-fi there.
Yeah, I was going to say it's like almost the tech in quotes of the book is almost all of the like military regulations and the organization of the military. I think there's like one part where it just starts going into like crazy numbers about how things are organized, and that was the one part where I was like, okay, this is a little much. I get what you're getting at, but I didn't need that. And like I think it even feeds into kind of the social engineering aspect where it's talking about like how our current democracy's transitioned into this crazy military style but everyone's happy government.
That's true. So I know we're talking a lot about the military, and that's our next topic is how the military is glorified in this book. I did a little bit of research, and Heinlein was in the Navy actually, not in the Army. But he spends a lot of time focusing on the military is really awesome, and it's basically a vehicle for Rico to have his coming of age story.
Even his dad has a coming of age where he's like, I wish I had joined the military, and then he's inspired by his son to himself join the military in his older age.
Yeah, that's true. But I one of the main things that where the science fiction comes into play is in modern day military you're generally killing other humans. Where in this it's great because you're killing giant spiders and everyone hates those.
Especially neo-dogs.
That is true.
If I remember correctly, they're not just killing. Did they not mention several different conflicts that they were involved in?
Yeah.
Some of them involving
Well, the
first drop is versus skinnies.
Yeah, remember? So it's talking about the skinnies were originally allied with the bugs, but after a couple of drops against the skinnies, they got the skinnies to convert to their own side, which is what turned the tide of war, or something like that. But that's I like how he drops those things throughout the book, but then he's just yeah, but we're just the guys who go in there. That didn't really matter to us.
It's true.
Sounds a lot like military mentality there.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's really emphasizing your viewpoint as someone in the military.
I guess the weird thing about this military is that I guess they start out the book trying to discourage people from joining the military, whereas I feel in modern day society, everyone the military has a huge manpower shortage, so they're constantly trying to have really inspiring videos to get people to join.
At the start, they're trying to discourage people from joining the military because A, that's how you get the vote is by doing your term in the military, but B, also when the book starts, there haven't been any conflicts forever, so everyone just joins the military for 2 years, does some slouchy job, and then goes back home and has the vote and is quote a citizen?
Citizen, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the point of discouraging at the start. Remember, towards the end, he's we couldn't fill the roles fast enough with quality.
They just have openings
because our quality control. Yeah, he's our quality control is so high that even with everyone joining, we couldn't get the guys who were qualified enough because we're not stupid enough to promote people who aren't cool enough to actually be the military guys. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems interesting because it seems like a semi-competent military, which is a very stark contrast to some
Also,
other books you've read.
Should we put the maybe obvious disclaimer that none of us have been in the military?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, none of us have any military experience. We're speaking from people that watch a lot of movies and read
So
books.
feel free to crap on us if you have, and we are terrible, lousy civilians.
We're not allowed to vote. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right. If we lived in this universe, yes. But yeah, so let's talk about the the way that society and citizenship in general are portrayed in this novel, which I think is the meat of this discussion here. So according to this, you're a civilian until you serve military service, and Johnny Rico's dad is a civilian that owns a business, right? And he kind of poops on Johnny when he wants to go join the military. He says, "Yeah, you've got everything you could ever want." He's there. It's kind of implied, or I think the outright says that he's basically like a rich kid, but he kind of finds his inner patriotism or whatever, and goes and joins the armed services basically so he can have this kind of societal responsibility. And the book just kind of keeps on going on and on about, in his high school courses where he's got this veteran teaching. And I think he just pontificates about it a lot in this book, too, where he's just like, back in the old days where those old democracies, anyone could be a citizen and vote and nobody gave shit. And, now that, people
got stabbed in parks and it was terrible.
That's right. Like things were terrible, and then once the people that knew something about anything, the veterans took over. Things were a lot better.
With people for minor crimes.
I actually, I'll admit that about like halfway through this book, or maybe 2/3 of the way, I was kind of reading it. I was like, yeah, this there's like a little bit of truth to this. But at the end of the book, I was like, I hate this book for making me feel that way.
Yeah, as I was telling you, like, it's exactly what I went through after high school. After I read Atlas Shrugged, I was like, oh my god, it's so true. And about a year later, I'm just like, oh my god, I was so full of crap.
It kind of screams like old people mentality of like, back in my day when people were veterans, people knew better and knew how to vote.
My analogy I came up for it is like, I like the problems that he poses and like kind of what he comes up with, but it's like physics where you come up with answers by making gross simplifications, and it's good enough so that you can see what's happening and then become aware of like the smaller things that are happening. But like in reality, yeah, if you ignore air resistance and all that stuff, the answers you get aren't going to work at all for a large majority of situations. And it's just like, he did that for social engineering. He's like, I'm posing a problem, and here's the answer given that problem with those conditions.
Yeah. What do you think, John? I feel like you're kind of bursting.
Someone who's actually an engineer and actually knows how this works.
Yeah. I don't know about that. You have to go into specifics about the engineering problem. I don't remember that part of the...
I was saying that's kind of like how the book feels. It's like he tried to turn like society's woes into like a problem with conditions that can be simply solved.
I think it's broadly true that in my opinion, the author's intention was to try to like paint this idealized society, but there was certainly some attempt at showing impartiality, trying to build this society of basically it's an appeal that the only people who are fit to run a democracy are those that are willing to sacrifice for it, which like on the face of it doesn't seem like a terrible thing. Like, should people be willing to sacrifice for the greater good? If those are the kind of people we want to be in leadership roles, that seems correct. But obviously, the course of the book revolves around a lot of really perverse government structures. So I'm not really sure about that. Plus, the military is sort of all-consuming to some extent, right? If your politicians can come from the military. And the military is the number one place where they're trying to detract. People don't join the military. We don't want you to come. A lot of the jobs that they describe in the military they are like, we'll find a job for you. So the world becomes about the military is the focus of government, and pretty much the government is the military. If that's the case, then Robert Heinlein actually, I think, maybe he's on to something, because this book was written in the 1950s, I think.
Yeah,
and you look at today's society, look at the line items for the government budget. most civilian agencies that are doing any type of foreign policy are shrinking, as opposed to the U.S. military, which is like expanding. It's it's already over $600 billion a year of the U.S. federal budget. So, I mean, maybe he was right. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what I was talking about. It's like, it makes a lot of sense. Like, people that want to put their ass on the line for their country should have the right to vote. That makes sense. But and I feel like it's kind of made better by the fact that the military is only killing these dislikable bug creatures and skinnies. But
he does make it very clear that like the military has to find a job for you. It's not like it's an exclusive thing that you're only allowed to join. Blah blah. It's like this is a thing that anyone who's willing to put in the, quote, 2 years when it starts, before there's like any actual war going on, can do that, put 2 years in, get the vote, become a citizen. So it seems like it's supposed, and also like a lot of the characters are minorities and stuff, which surprised me for a book written in the 50s.
Yeah, I was actually going to talk about that a little bit later with gender roles, but let me just touch on a little bit now. Like it kind of makes it seem like, hey, especially women, and gender equality, it's like, hey, women are good at math and piloting, according to this book, so let's throw them into the Navy. And I'm pretty sure when Heinlein was in the Navy, that probably wasn't a thing.
Yeah, it seemed very empowering. It's like very nice to kind of touch that. He seems to indicate that they actually have quicker reflexes. They're smarter. They have more math skills. They, you don't want a male pilot because female pilots are so much more superior and better at doing calculations and stuff like that. It's like, I was all for it, even though, if you had flipped the genders and just been like, oh, men are smarter and they do better math calculations, people would be up in arms. Like, I was actually totally for with the whole, oh yeah, women are better at math. Okay, I'm not going to debate it. I'm totally fine with his characterization of that.
I'm sure there's actual research on these things that I am unaware of. I have conclusions of those.
So I agree with that sentiment, but I'm going to temper it with with a note that this author falls into the same trap that we see in a lot of sci-fi books, which is sort of like this fetish of women. He talks about in lots of parts of the book how the only reason to live is for women, and if there's a woman on board, then the whole social structure revolves around that.
I did like how the sci-fi element got introduced, where he's like, I thank God every morning I was born as a species with two sexes.
Yeah, maybe that part wasn't as forward thinking. I tried to give him a little bit of credit with the woman as pilot thing, but a little awkward there. But back to the society citizenship topic.
It doesn't seem like he has any, that's the thing, even though they do that about women in general, it doesn't seem like he has, the character has any of that towards the other women in the military, besides just women are nice and attractive. It's not like he has any complaints about them being in roles or anything like that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's like their professions are good, but then sexiness is also there, which is a little sexist, but
interesting.
But anyway, so
what about you, woman on this panel? What is your opinion?
One day. So let's jump back to the society and citizenship topic a little bit. We're talking about how people are kind of aware of the virtues of their society, and Rico learns a lot about this through what's the character's name? Colonel something that's his high school.
Zim?
Oh no, Dubois. That's Dubois.
Dubois, right? Dubois. Yeah.
So and in this world, they teach why previous governments suck and morality in an actual. Is it pass fail, or you just have to literally show up and you're fine?
No, they said it's pass fail.
Yeah, I think it's not like a letter graded class. You just have to show up and have philosophical discussions with your teacher, basically.
Except it's in the math logic department. That's what I was saying before. Is this seems like a very idealized solution to societal issues. The fact that he would put history and morality in a logic course is both very attractive and hilarious.
We'll talk more about that since you're our resident teacher.
Maybe not morality, but hey, I'll listen.
I like the point where it's his homework is write a proof for why the Crusades happened for the same way as any other war, and he's it's very long and convoluted, but it's the proof is still there. I'm just oh my god, this is hilarious. It's what every single math oriented person wants the world to be. It's you could just solve it like a problem, and it's what like economics wants to be.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, this is another like, hey, this is, this makes a lot of sense, but then you're like, reality doesn't work like that.
I know.
If only.
If only.
So one of the, we read a different book earlier this year, or, this recording year.
Like almost exactly a year ago, right?
Yeah. The Forever War, which was published much later, I think maybe around 20 years later. And reading this, it seems very much as the Forever War might have been a direct reaction to this book. So if you guys recall, in the Forever War, there's, the guy joins the army, and there are powered suits, and they go and, there's a lot of time spent training, and they go and fight random aliens. But it is a hugely different tone. Like people,
yes.
If anyone dies in this book, it's like, man, he bought the farm, that sucked. Whereas, like in Forever War, it's like, he died horribly, with a lot more flowery death language and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you think about what's going on at the time, like the Korean War and Vietnam War, Korean War specific to this one, and Vietnam with the Forever War. So, what do you guys think of that?
Oh, I mean, since we're complaining about there is a bunch of sci-fi, but whereas like this book, Starship Troopers, is kind of like, oh yeah, we have the thing that lets us go faster in light. It's cool. Like Forever War spends forever going on about the consequences of relativity, and like that's a key aspect of how the book works, is like the consequences of relativity. So it has to explain it all, and explains the suits in a lot more detail. Like it's much more it feels like much more interested in the tech and the science.
That is true. Yeah, that one's much more of a science fiction book than this, which is kind of like
Highline also like this book comes out 15 years before Forever War. So you kind of have to give a little bit of credit to Highline, because like he's working in a world where updates have not come in quite as quickly.
Yeah,
I think you're hinting on something though, Stop, that I kind of agree with. The Forever War, in both books, there is this sense of totality of the military, and obviously there's conflict. But I think that as opposed to Heinlein's book, which sort of makes the case that the military could be an institution for good for society. There's a lot of the whole thing goes to hell in the Forever War and is remade several times. And I think that there's definitely a duality. There's a loss of trust somewhere in the next 15 years between those two books. There's a loss of trust in that institution.
Both books, like alien villains, seem to be. I'm not sure how much I'm reading. But like they're both kind of hive-mindy type things. I'm like, are those both supposed to be like analogies for communism?
Yeah,
and it's very interesting because like in Starship Troopers, it's very much like, yeah, and we got people to join our side, and we're doing it. It's great. Whereas in Forever War, the solution is humanity also eventually becomes a hive mind. And I hadn't even thought of that before. I was just like, oh no, is that the suggestion of the solution?
People have also made comparisons saying that like Starship Troopers, like the government is a little bit kind of socialist, meaning that everyone contributes to society, sacrifice their personal needs for the greater good. I have heard commentary saying that the Starship Troopers world is a little bit controversial, and that that government is a little bit not so freedom.
Oh, it's like convincing people. Yeah, I've heard I've heard a lot of people accuse it of being very fascist, where it's like give yourself up for the state and that type of thing.
Exactly. So it's not quite a whole like just freedom and
but
blah, blah, blah.
like I feel like Starship Troopers feels a little bit more like an analogy for it's like what you're taught at school with like the founding fathers and all the big wars and stuff, where it's like fighting for freedom, that type of thing. Like it felt a little more direct towards that than either communism or fascism or something, which is a little more obviously directly state oriented. Like I think it's hard in Starship Troopers because he's in the military, so you get that perspective so strongly.
I guess two other points, kind of going back to the whole science thing about the relativity thing. Like looking up really quickly, like the brief history of relativity. Like apparently it gained mainstream acceptance around 1960s. So it's actually kind of interesting timeline-wise that this book comes out in 59, and then relativity hits a big scene in 60s, and then you get a book with incorporates like very similar kind of idea about space war with bugs, but then relativity suddenly goes into the book in the next version 15 years later. I think the second point. Let's see, can I remember what my second point was? No, just continue on. Brain fart.
All right, so let's jump into some final thoughts since we're running a little short on time. So, there's a lot of time spent on just military minutia in this book, with the theme being like, going into the military is the thing to do, and you're a good citizen if you have military experience. I kind of have a little bit of salt against the book for like making me kind of get on board and then realize what I had done at the end of the book, and and even to the point we were talking a little bit before the show about the comparison to the movie, where the movie made whatever 10 or 15 years ago now just kind of makes fun of that society, like join up, the military is great.
It's like it changes all like the book has a ton of characters who are like racial minorities, but then the movie's just like white people,
a bunch of white people. So that's kind of how I kind of feel towards this book how the movie feels towards the source material, which is like, this is kind of funny and comical and goofy, ultimately, even though a lot of it takes itself pretty seriously. So what do you think, Charlie?
I think in terms of the books we've read, it's probably my favorite book since Forever War. Like, if I probably had the same issues as you do, but I really like the fact that it actually got me to like seriously think about things. I'm not sure how seriously.
A little seriously. As much serious as you can.
It got me thinking about stuff, which is good, and it's well written. The few action scenes and few tech things in it were really cool. Like, I understand why people, even though I'm kind of like, it doesn't feel very sci-fi to me, I understand why people are like super invested in it as a sci-fi novel versus all the political stuff. And so, yeah, regardless of how I feel about the opinions and whatnot, I liked it a lot.
Awesome. How about you, John? What did you think?
I would probably say the same as you guys, but there were some interesting theories posed, interesting ideas. I thought it was a pretty well written take on it. It's a grind, though. If you're looking for high action or deep sci-fi, it's going to be a grind to get through it. But I would also say that based on how things have progressed in the last 50 years, 70 years, I would say the Heinlein's projections of what might come to pass are a little disturbing if you just look back and see what has come to pass and where we are today.
People are dying in parks. Time to start whipping people.
So that's all I got to say.
All right. Vincent, what do you think?
I think it was a terrific book on 3 counts. One, I had only ever watched the movie, which, like you kind of mentioned before, is like this kind of hilarity, kind of like rompy, kind of sci-fi thing where I didn't expect Rico to have any depth at all. And when I picked up the book, I was like, oh my God, this is so much better than the movie, or better than I was expecting. So I was expecting some like rompy sci-fi kind of book, and it became this really serious book. And I loved that. And then the second point is that the writing was terrific. I really like how meaty everything was the way I kind of mentioned before. But I think the one thing that I didn't bring up before that I really enjoyed about this book is actually the character development. Yes, there's a lot of philosophy. There's a lot of kind of like, makes you think about, like why you're doing certain things. And maybe it takes a very strong stance as to, why military is great and that society is great. But people make a lot of mistakes in this book. People get whipped. People get discharged from the military. There's a lot of things that, you wouldn't expect to kind of happen. And people change their minds as the book goes along. And I would actually argue that, even though I wouldn't necessarily identify with any of the characters in the book and say, oh, I totally want to be that guy, I really enjoyed how people kind of came around and they changed their thought processes. I think Rico's dad is probably the least convincing of them. I think he was maybe the most poorly developed character, but even he had kind of a change of heart and change of mind. And I really liked how that kind of developed in the book compared to many of the other books we've read where the hero is just a hero and he's just like, well, my way or the highway, let me smash the the patriarchy, let me do it my way, and I'm a good guy.
I think in terms of being like a novel with character development and everything like that, this is easily on like the top end of everything we've read.
So highly recommend this book. It's definitely a worthwhile use of your time, especially if you read the movie, because you kind of get this very kind of interesting alternative version of it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's all about all the time we have for today. And of course, as usual, if you have feedback or suggestions on books we should read and discuss, you can reach us at subplotofcoursepodcast@gmail.com or on Twitter at subplotpodcast. For next month's episode, we're going to be talking about Contact by Carl Sagan and published in 1985. But first, we've got a special anniversary episode going to be released in the next couple of weeks. It's amazing that we've hit a year so far. I'm kind of surprised we lasted this long. To be honest, we'll see how things go. So stay tuned for that. Say goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Contact. It's the secret. It's the moment. No, I don't remember the rest of the song. You remember the 3-2-1 Contact theme song?
Yes, we do.